Hello, today I am going to be showing you how to create this. I'm using Blender 2.62 and I'm pretty sure that this will work with maybe 2.61, but just to be sure, if you haven't updated, go ahead and update if you want to follow this tutorial, and hopefully yours will come out just the same. I'm also using cycles for the render, and that's what we'll be going through today. Okay, so let's get started. Alright, I have the default scene here. Before we get into the heavy lifting part, why don't we go ahead and set up things so you can follow along. I usually use the Maya preset, but to make this easier on you if you are new to Blender or don't use the Maya preset, I changed my keys back to Blender. I think I usually have the Maya mouse settings turned on, but that really shouldn't affect how you work, other than I think the left and the right buttons are switched for selecting. Another thing that we want to do is go over to System, and if you're on a PC and you have an NVIDIA card, enable CUDA and make sure your video card is showing up there. That way when you do the rendering, it will use your video card. We can also go over here and let's see, switch over to cycles and make sure this is on GPU. That way, again, it will use your video card. Alright, so normally I guess you usually get rid of this cube, but we're actually going to end up using it. So let's leave it there, and let's go ahead and in the version of the video that I did, let's see, I think I have a slight bevel on it, so we're going to put a bevel modifier, and let's see, yeah, so I mean, it doesn't really take any tweaking. You can kind of set it up to be whatever you want. Oh yeah, another thing I need to do, I guess, is to show you what I'm typing and hitting. Turn that on. Sorry, this is, even though this is the third time that I'm recording this video due to various circumstances, this is actually the first time I've tried doing a video tutorial, so I apologize for any stumbling that I might do along the way. This is a test for me, and I'd like to do more of these. So, alright, let's get going. Since we put the bevel on that's really kind of all we need to do for the cube at this point. We're going to go ahead and move that off to another layer. I'm just going to put that on the second layer, and let's go ahead and create a UV sphere, and let's see, go into edit mode, and oh, sorry, I'm used to the Maya keys. Hit W, and we're going to subdivide smooth. That way we have a little more information here on the mesh, so when we set up the dynamic paint, which is how I revealed those particles, we have some more vertexes for the paint to use. Alright, let's get out of edit mode, and let's go ahead and scale the sphere up, and then we're going to put smoothing on it. And let's see, let's go ahead and set the dynamic paint up. One thing that I figured out in creating this video before is for the cycles, when you're doing the viewport rendering, for it to kind of update correctly, for some reason you need to have a keyframe on this sphere. So I'm going to go ahead and add a keyframe to location right now. We're not going to really be animating the sphere in any way, but for some reason you have to have a keyframe for the viewport to update when you're in the cycles render. So go ahead and activate dynamic paint. We're going to create we're going to use the sphere as a canvas, and let's go ahead and change the surface type to weight, and under dynamic paint output we're going to hit the plus mark so it creates the vertex group for that paint. We're going to add a plane and scale that up. Want to make the plane, the size of the plane, larger than the diameter of the sphere, just so that way we make sure that it's interacting with the sphere correctly. We're going to add dynamic paint to that, make that a brush, and change the paint source to mesh volume and proximity. And let's go ahead and increase this paint distance up a bit so we get a nice smooth transition from where it's being affected to where it's not being affected. Let's go ahead and put 3. Actually, maybe that's too big. Let's do 2.8, maybe 2.6. Okay, that looks good. Alright, and we're going to move this up out of the way until it is not affecting the sphere anymore. And let's create a keyframe. Then we're going to go ahead and jump ahead to 180 frames, and let's move this plane down to where it is almost through the sphere. Actually, let's just go ahead and pass all the way through and do another keyframe. Alright, and let's see. Yeah, it looks like that'll work out pretty nicely. You need to go ahead now and save. And let's just call this ball dynamic paint v2, since this will be the second time that I'm using this directory. You can call it whatever you want. And the reason we need to save now, other than it's just a good idea to save so you can keep your work, is you cannot cache the dynamic paint until you've saved it. Since that's what we want to do now, I'm going to go down here to dynamic paint cache, and let's go ahead and bake that out. Alright, so at this point we should have, at this point you should be seeing nothing on the sphere. I wonder why that's happening. Okay, well, we'll see what happens. Cache is outdated. Why don't we go ahead and free that again? I'm just kind of concerned. There we go. And let's bake it again. There we go. Okay, very good. So as you can see, the plane is painting the sphere using that weight map, and that will be useful for what we're going to do next. Let's go ahead and add a particle system and change it over to hair. And I'm not sure if this really has any bearing on by the way, you want to turn advanced on. I'm not sure if this really affects anything or not, but I usually kind of scale the hairs down just so it looks better. I don't know if it really does anything at this point, but we'll see. Then we're going to go down to Object and select that cube, the default cube, and let's see, then we're going to actually scale those cubes back up, and we want to up this random size. Another thing we want to do is change the velocity here to object Z. That way you can use these rotation settings here, and I just kind of mess them up. I don't know, whatever you think looks right. And let's see, then we're going to change this number to 2000 so it's filled in a little bit more. Alright, and now we're going to use that weight map from the dynamic paint. So let's go to vertex groups, and under length let's pick that weight. So now when you scrub, it should be sizing up those cubes for wherever the dynamic paint is affecting it. So blue, no cubes, and as the weight increases to red, you have the cubes. Alright, and let's see. So under the particle settings also, we don't need this sphere to be showing up while we're rendering, so let's uncheck emitter. And we also don't need to see the plane at this point, so let's move that off to the second layer also. So now we have that going on, and let's go over to cycles and see how it looks. Alright. The light right there, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on, so let's go ahead and move that up and over, maybe up a little bit more. Switch back over to cycles. It looks like we need to turn the turn use nodes on, so it'll be using the cycle nodes, and let's increase that strength a bit. That's kind of cool. Let's go ahead and move this light over here. Another thing we can do is move the camera back a little bit. Neat trick that I learned is if you're used to other 3D programs, a lot of times when you're navigating your scene through the camera, you just move your viewport using the viewport controls, and it'll move the camera at the same time. That's one of the hard things I kind of found with Blender, was that the moment that you go to adjust your viewport, it pops you out of the camera. So if you're like me and you've used other 3D programs and you kind of like that behavior, go to your camera view and hit N to bring up the sidebar over here, and there's a checkbox, lock camera to view. You turn that on and you get this dotted line around the view, and now when you move the camera, well, now when you move the viewport around, the camera actually follows, so that's kind of cool. Let's go ahead and uncheck that now that we have the camera kind of where we're wanting it, and that way when I use my mouse wheel to zoom in, it's blowing up the camera view, which is kind of what I want. So turn the lock back on, and now I can continue to adjust the camera view just so we can see what's going on. Let's go back to cycles. Let's see, I think that'll be a good view to start setting up our materials with. Let's see. Let's go back to the solid shade mode and get out of the camera view. Select that light, Shift D to duplicate, and let's move it over here. We're going to kind of use this as a fill light. Let's see. Go ahead and turn cycles back on, and that's a little bright, so we can turn that guy down. It's about there. It's looking alright. Okay, go ahead and click on one of the cubes. That'll let us adjust the materials for that. I'm sorry, that actually selected the sphere, so let's select the cube in our object manager list here. It already has base material on it, so let's tell it to use the nodes. And in that video that I showed at the beginning, I was using a mix shader, and for the top shader here I was using a diffuse. For the bottom shader I was using a glossy, and for the FAC Actually, first let's go ahead and set this up. For the glossy, I was using like a bluish material, and this vac is the mix ratio between the two. So, you know, at 0 you're only seeing the diffuse, and at 1 you're only seeing the glossy. And what I did on that example that you saw at the beginning was I was using the kind of the glancing angle of these faces to decide what material was being shown. And the way I did that was under vac, click on this dot, and I did facing. And so for the faces that are facing directly at the camera, you're getting just the diffuse, and the more that they're angled away from the camera, like these ones where my mouse pointer is, you're getting more of the glossy. And you can still adjust the factor of that to get what effect you're desiring. I think I left it at just 0.5 because it kind of gives a nice mix. And let's see. Another thing we can do is go over to world, tell it to use nodes, and I just put it down to black. And it gives it a little more dynamic appearance. So let's see. I guess we can set up the camera animation now. I'm just trying to think back to what I did, if there's anything else we need to set up. Let's go ahead and start that camera animation. So I started with the camera kind of zoomed in on these the upper cubes when they were just starting to come in, and let's set a keyframe for location rotation. And let's see, so then right around here, let's see, around 80, let's go ahead and, oops, sorry, I keep hitting the wrong key. Let's see, I think I kind of did that. Set another location rotation, and then around 160. Let's see. Set another keyframe there, and then to play out for the rest of this, we can go ahead and zoom out even more. Alright, so that's looking pretty cool. Let's scrub through here and see how we're doing. So that's looking alright. Alright, so with the default way that Blender does its keys, they are sloped, but they're not really all that smooth. So what I like to do is I go over to the animation screen and or the animation layout, and let's see here, hit your period over in this viewport and hit A again just to make sure all these keys are selected, then hit V, and let's see, I think I just did automatic, and you'll see that these kind of shifted a little bit, and I just think that gives you a smoother result. Let's go ahead and go back over to default, and we can see what that did. I just think that gives you a smoother result. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is set up the particle system that I also had going on that was giving like some floating bits of dust or debris just kind of floating around in the background. And to do that, we can get out of the camera view and go to layer 3 and create a cube. Scale that up, and right about there is pretty good. And let's see, go over here and hold on one. Sorry about that, I forgot to mute my phone. Things that I learned. Now under display we're going to change the type to wire and go to particles, and let's add a new particle system. Emitter is fine. We're going to fill the volume, and let's go down to field weights, and turn gravity down. And let's see, that way we're just kind of getting it maybe down a little bit more. And we can add some Brownian motion to it. I think that just kind of randomizes the motion a little bit. And that's pretty dense, so let's go ahead and change this down to 300. There we go. That's looking a little bit better, and let's change the lifetime up to 120. That way we don't have a lot of pieces just popping in and out. Gravity still looks kind of high, so let's go ahead and change that down a little bit. Down even more. Because I just kind of want to have these pieces just kind of floating around. Alright, and another thing that I did was this start. I think I put that to -20 that way, so at the beginning there were already some particles just floating around. So you don't just have this empty scene and then all of a sudden all these extra particles show up. That might still be a little busy, but we're gonna wait and see what it looks like once we're gonna create some dust shapes and see how that looks. And to do that, I'm going to add a plane and go into edit mode and subdivide it. And these are not going to need to be really detailed. We just want to have something to float around in the scene. Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button, so let's see. And you would just want to change that. Just so it's not exactly the same. We can make one more. Okay, and let's shift click on all of those and Control G to put those in a group, and we're just going to name it dust. And let's see, we're going to go ahead and scroll down go to group, and pick dust. So now you have all these pieces floating around. And we can randomize the size of these a little bit, just so they're not uniform. Another thing we can do is to, let's see, put a little spin on these guys. That looks like a lot of dust. Why don't we go ahead and change this number down again to, let's do half of that. Because really we just want to have something in the background. Alright, so let's click on one of those and do Shift G, and then we're going to do group so it selects the rest of them, and let's move that to layer 4. We don't really need those there. Okay, so I think at this point I'm going to select both those layers, go to your camera view, turn cycles on, oh, that's right, another thing I forgot is we need to turn the rendering of that cube we're using as the volume for all those particles so you can see the rest of your scene. So just select that cube, go to your particle settings, scroll down until you see the render, and uncheck emitter. Alright, so now we have this. Now another thing that I had set up in the scene that I showed at the beginning was depth of field. And that's relatively easy to set up. What you do is right click on one of these cubes that you kind of want to be in the general area of the focus of the camera, and you'll see that added your 3D cursor to where that cube is. And then you select the camera and you go to the camera tab, turn limits on. Actually, you really don't even need that because we're going to put a null there, or an empty. Shift A, we're going to add an empty, and we can call that one focus. Click on your camera again, go to the camera settings, change focus to focus, and let's go back to the camera view, go into cycles, and once you start turning this number up, you'll see that the depth of field starts to kick in. You really don't want to go too high with this, and I have not figured out any sort of correlation between this number here and an actual f-stop setting or aperture setting like on a real camera. So if anybody out there knows what it is, I'd love to know. And another thing you want to do is under blades, change that up to be about 5, and if you set your cycles settings up high enough, that will give you a really nice depth of field. I think it's called a bokeh or bokeh. I'm not sure how you really say that, but like this back here, if you go and you go to your render settings and under the integrator, if you turn, like, say your preview up to 150, you'll start seeing that it starts taking on the pentagram shape from the camera having the 5 blades. And I think that's about it. Wow, getting some really crazy depth of field. That actually might be too much. Well, you know, it's really up to you. You know where the setting is. If you feel like that might be a little too crazy, You can change that down. It's still pretty heavy. Nice thing is too is that you can animate this setting if you wanted to. So maybe, let's see. That's not, you know, that might be a little interesting. You have this kind of objects in the background coming in, and then as more of them come in, you're getting the focus on them, and then they resolve to be the cubes, and then you're left with this scene. So last settings that you want to do is go and let's save one more time. And that is where the recording failed. Hi. Okay, so let's finish up the rest of this tutorial. One thing after looking at the scene again that I felt needed to be changed was the particle box that is housing those dust particles. Originally we had it to about there, and I was looking through the camera and it just wasn't really seeing the dust show up the way I wanted it to, so you can just scale that up, and just making it a little bit larger I think really helps out. That way we're getting more of this the kind of floaty dust particles going around. And one other thing you can do to kind of see what your results are going to look like, the particles, the dust particles, Blender can show you kind of the preview of what they look like while you're scrubbing through, but to see what they truly will be doing, you need to bake them. So we can go ahead and on your particle tab you just look for cache, and we can bake those. With as simple of a simulation as we had going, it really won't take too long. And I had it to only set do a cache every 10 steps because there's really not that much complicated movement going on with those dust particles. So anyway, so we were finishing it up, so go to your render tab, and like I said, I'm not sure if I said it before, but if you need an alpha, you need to turn on RGB alpha, and then I believe you also need to check transparent, and make sure your render setting is up at 300. That's, I believe, what I used in the example that I was playing at the very beginning. And then after that, you just need to make sure you pick the file type that you want to work with. If you did set this to RGBA, you need to make sure you pick a file format that can handle alphas like Targa or PNG, and that should be it. You need to make sure to set your output directory correctly, and after that you really should be ready to go. Thank you very much for watching this tutorial, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm still trying to figure out how to get my audio to record reliably without cutting out. That's what happened. That's why there was such a jump between what you were watching and this. But I appreciate you watching this, and any questions or comments, please post them and I'll try to get back with you. Thank you very much, and I hope to make more of these for you guys to watch. Alright.